Okay, we're recording. Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Santone. I'm a professor of art history and visual studies in the art department at Cal State East Bay. And I'm here having a conversation as part of the faculty and staff exhibition at the University Art Gallery, Making and Seeing during COVID-19, speaking with two of the faculty who are involved in this show, Sian Geraghty and Trinie Dalton. Sian Geraghty is a 3D artist from Berkeley. She teaches courses on 3D modeling and animation and manages the computer equipment lab in the art department. Trinie Dalton is assistant professor of English creative writing. She is also a curator and art writer and the publisher and editor of 7 books, the most recent of which is Destroy Bad Thoughts, Not Yourself. Okay, so first maybe I'll ask some questions of Sian and then we'll talk to Trinie about her work and then both of us, or all three of us rather. So Sian, let's start off. Can you tell us about your process of locating and choosing Lacey Crombie's character art? What was appealing about that particular illustration and how did you choose it over other possibilities?
Well, that's a really good question. So when I'm thinking about what kind of character I want to create in 3D, there's a bunch of different criteria that I look at. Because you want, number one is an appealing character that's going to show well in your portfolio or on, art sites. And so first thing I was drawn to was color. She's got this bright orange hair and then like beautiful shades of blue in her costume. So that was a huge one. She has pose and expression, which is something that I teach my students about. It's really important to be able to communicate as much as possible quickly to employers or fellow artists. And expression and pose are really important and really catch eye. And it's something so relatable for other artists. And then, yeah, there's just a few more focal points, details, like where details are located in the character. She has a really nice balance, I would say. Some characters, a lot that you'll find of concept artists, go way overboard, so you'll have detail absolutely everywhere, and that's not something that makes an appealing character. You really want the detail to be where you draw your focus. And then I wanted something that would challenge me as an artist and a 3D modeler as well. The hair that the character has is still very much a work in progress. And it's definitely a huge challenge. So that's something I'm working on. And, but I think the rest of it was like achievable. So it's kind of a mix of achievable and stretch goals.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit more about what was it about the pose or expression that you liked specifically?
She has kind of a defiant, ready for battle kind of feel about her, which I think, even though I chose this right before COVID's kind of hit here, at least, I feel like maybe subconsciously I was thinking that we're getting ready for battle. Yeah. And it's always a good feeling to have that readiness. So
yeah, it certainly reminds me a lot of you, actually, this kind of defiant, ready for battle. I miss seeing you in the hallways as you tackle all of the crises in our department on a regular basis. You said the work's still in progress and the hair in particular. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the next steps you're going to take for developing the model?
Yeah, so in particular with ZBrush, the choice for hair is either to have it very stylized the way it is, or you can kind of move into the realm of realistic, like actual strands of hair. And I've kind of tried playing with both, but I think stylized is serving this character better. And then creating the hair is kind of a 3-step process. You usually block it out and then do a hair pass the first time. And I'm kind of on hair pass number 3, I would say. There's just some curls and some braids that I'm just not liking how they're feeling, and it doesn't quite capture the spirit of the model. So keep going.
Okay. Could you tell us a little bit more then also about some of the choices that you made about how to adapt what you saw in Crombie's character design and your own? Because I noticed that there are some differences. Partly that's about this difference in the level of detail. Partly that's because your work is still in progress, somewhat, I think. But I think there are also some choices that you're making about the character that move away from the original design. And I want to know a little bit about those choices.
So I think originally I was trying to get it as close to the character as possible. The pose, I haven't quite given her that pose just yet, so that's still in progress. The level of detail, I find it's something particular to 3D modeling. Something that looks great in a flat 2D drawing doesn't translate very well into certain forms of 3D. And I would eventually like to animate this character. So having that, having a little less detail will help with the animation later. But I tried to keep in like details that I really wanted to keep included, like the shoulders and the detail on those, and a lot in the jacket and the coat. But I'm still kind of working on some of the other details with the hair and some of the form.
Yeah, great. Okay. I like so much what you've done with the characters so far, and I know we'll be excited to see how it develops. Maybe maybe you'll show it in the faculty show next year as a finished, done thing. You finish it, and it'd be really interesting to see it in its animated form too.
Yes.
When you're done with that, I know these processes take a long time.
Yeah.
So let me ask some questions of Trinie Dalton now about the 2 works that she submitted. First, if you could tell us, Trinie, a little bit about the book, Destroy Bad Thoughts, Not Yourself. What's this about? And tell us a little bit about the form of the book. In the gallery, because we're online, we have only the cover to see. And I know it's got a lot of interesting depth to it.
I can show books on the screen. I really relate to it's such a great trio here because I really relate to the issues you're dealing with, transforming 2-dimensional into 3-dimensional. And I think a lot about that when making books and book arts, of course. And photography is all about that too. So yeah, I was really relating to what you said. And this book, there was a sign. I just moved from the Mojave Desert, and there was a sign in somebody's yard on a busy highway, and they will put messages up, comforting messages for us to passersby. So this was actually a message on the road that I passed every day coming home from work because I was commuting long distances, and I had lost 2 people very close to me to tragic accidents. And so this really resonated with me. And I was making a collection of micro essays related to Americana and musical rhythms in West African music primarily, and then moving into blues and Americana folk music. So I just decided to meld the 2 and make a collection of micro essays. And since it was an untraditional format, I'm always really a big fan of working with independent presses where I can have more leeway and more aesthetic vision for the projects. And, you know, I think for anyone who works with books as material, we often think of the objects, we imagine the books as objects on the shelf and imagine all these like dynamic, beautiful objects, you know. So we made a risograph edition through a gallery in LA, and That's like silk screens. So it's basically like a cross between copy machine and silk screen, risograph. It looks like a copy machine, but there's a wet ink process with these drums full of wet ink, colored ink, and you swap them out and run one pass at a time. So a book of this length, it kind of looks like a cheapy, you know, paperbacky pocketbook, but it was so labor intensive to make this on risograph. It was really overwhelming and fun. So yeah, there are collages throughout. We did like a 2-color process. And the books are always a graphic design project. I borrowed typefaces from a friend who's a typographer. He lent me some type. And yeah, they're short essays. They're mostly a page long. So really working with flash fiction and micro essay as a form. It's kind of in line. Often with my books, I'll do exhibitions surrounding them with artworks that are included in the books, or if they're anthologies, I'll make, these are a couple anthologies that I've made in the past. Myth Them and Dear New Girl, or whatever your name is. And when they turn into commercial trade editions, they always start as handmade objects with collages. But if they're collaborative and curated, they often entail a lot of exhibition, film screenings, readings, performative events to bring the books to life. Wonderful. So I think of them as art projects as well as literary projects, and you know, ways to build collaboration between the different art disciplines.
Yeah, this reminds me actually also of something I was talking about in one of my classes, the idea of transmedia storytelling. There's a way that that's also what's happening here, that you're working across multiple media to communicate something, especially if you've got an exhibition in the book. And I really want to hold that thing. I want to flip through it myself.
This is amazing.
Professor Dalton's such a new professor to Cal State East Bay, so we haven't met in person yet. So I hope we can at some point, because that looks great.
It's like hide behind my book until then.
Okay, so enough of the book for just a moment. I also want to ask you about the photograph that you submitted from the Birth of the Internet series. Could you tell us a little bit about what's happening there? It looks like the dolls are performing some kind of ritual, and
I think they're inventing the internet. I think so. I don't know. They're in a seance. I wanted to do some like witchcrafty. Yeah, how is the internet invented? I started, well, it's not new to think about this for a lot of us, but in the desert especially, I was making these sculptures with rocks and then just tying string around them and starting to play with these absurd ideas about how internet works. With these underground lines and the Wi-Fi and it's mind-boggling. And yet we're so dependent on it every day, and we can hardly survive right now without it. So it's really important to me to think about how this has transformed society. So that's my current project is about that thematically, but dealing with dolls. So I'm doing doll sculptures and photographs as meditative images, and then writing vignetted essays around them to talk about probably the birth of the internet and the internet era, as you know, some of us are on this generational cusp of remembering
the
computer and then welcoming the computer in, so we're in this middle ground, and I think there's a lot of room for exploration in that subject matter. So I think they're in a seance. And I had also another piece, which is like I'm using a lot of 90s pop objects for the series, and I had made a piece on pegboard with Beanie Baby piece bearers paracorded onto it as an imagined way of inventing the internet too. And now I'm making this, you can't see the back of my desk, but I'm making like thousands of these rainbow noodles out of polymer clay. And then they're gonna just like be hanging on this like fake wizard staff, I think, playing with that.
All of those sound like such better versions of the story of the beginning of the internet than the military machine that I've often read about, right? And
I know.
Women were
Like,
so involved in the birth of the internet. They're also, I think, really involved in the parts of the internet that your project seems to be focusing on, the beginnings of e-commerce and the formations of networked community. I mean, the seance speaks to me on that level of all of those. I mean, maybe it's just because my study of the internet history comes from a women's studies course in college, but we talked a lot about the kind of women's fan communities that migrated very quickly from cassette tapes circulating by mail to the internet in the 80s and early 90s. So
totally. And the history of subcultures, especially in queer community, feminist community, punk, underground communities, you know, that period of time when especially queer and BIPOC people were making these chapbooks. Publishers were making chapbooks to publish things that were underrepresented in literature, still are. But it was really a different time. And then, so yeah, moving to the internet, like, gave people a really utopian space, it seemed like, for a while. But the lines between, utopia and dystopia are very, very blurry right now, I think, to say the least. And scary a lot of the time. So I'm really interested in that, thinking of that like as a taxonomy and not just as a given that we have no control over in our society. You know, you have to take agency and learn about the history of these things and like process them in your own personal way, I think, to get back at that sense of agency and empowerment, I think.
Okay,
right?
So that leads me to my next question then, which is why dolls and toys as a way of telling this story?
I think they were like, okay, I have a toddler, so I'm reinvestigating toys. I've always loved toys and collector mentality, you know, I'm really interested in that. And toys and pop culture, and especially have taught a lot of theory courses and thought a lot about how toys and how pop cultural objects reflect our society, right? Like monsters reflect our society. The ways our dolls look reflect our society. There's an uncanniness in there that's really fun to think about. And so, yeah, I think the toys are in part just because I wanted to make work that my daughter can enjoy and play with me while I'm making it. So my practice, you know, as a mother, totally changes very often because you've got this baby like tearing up everything you're making while you're making it. So you're like, okay, I can either get really mad about this, or I can remake my
stuffed animals,
or I can work with stuffed animals, and she can have her sculpture, and I can have mine, and we can collaborate. Yeah, so wanting to collaborate with the kid, and also because these dolls are really and dollhouse miniatures, they're such a microcosm into what's going on with social justice and what our perceptions about culture have been, perhaps, versus what we're dealing with facing in new ways right now, right? We're having to face the reality of historical fact in ways that I feel like maybe we could avoid before a little bit more. Maybe, you know, Americans especially could just do their thing without, you know, too much of a problem. Some Americans, I would say, right? A lot of people have never had that privilege. But I think that like racial reckoning, social justice areas, it's just like kind of a perfect place to talk about toys. Plus they're just absurd and they're fun and they invite everybody in. You can look, I want artwork that, you know, looks fun and you can then just enjoy it for what it is without a lot of concept inside it. And then but if you want to think about more of the concept, you can go there. But I like that view and experience that's like multivalent in artwork and writing. So toys are just funny and silly and absurd, and
but also super serious and really compelling object things that can do all kinds of stuff. And there are a lot of artists who've worked with toys as objects, thinking, I mean, Mike Kelly comes to mind in particular as a similarity, although what he's doing with toys is very different from what you're doing with toys.
Totally, but he's one of my favorite artists and a mentor in the LA community that I grew up in. So this whole project is actually, it's important to credit him because the most recent book it's primarily about losing people to suicide, and Mike Kelly had a tragic end too. And a lot of people were really shocked and upset about his death, and continue to be in our LA community. And yeah, so I wanted to make a book and a project, a multimedia project in dialogue with him, taking up his ideas directly in dialogue with his book and exhibitions about the uncanny that happened at the Tate, like in the 90s. So
Yeah.
The book that I'm writing now is actually in direct conversation with him and those ideas.
Okay, great. Well, I hope we can talk about it further. I'm interested now. This art historian wants to talk more about that.
Yeah.
So in the meantime, in the midst of our conversation, I want to kind of bring Sean back in and start noticing some of the similarities.
So I actually, my first master's degree was in toy design.
Oh, fantastic.
My MFA.
There's
my
all these
degree.
layers of similar.
Yeah. Oh, I wish I could go get a degree in toy design right now.
Oh, it was so much
jealous.
fun. I think one of the more interesting aspects that I've kind of studied was that children before the ages of like 4 to 6 are very open to any kind of toy out there. So their minds are not yet formed by brands. But after like 6, 7, 8, that's when they go for the all Marvel, all Disney, and they get that influence to them. So I feel like that super early age that it sounds like your kids are at, or your daughter's at, is that really eye-opening time when the kids are just open to everything, and they reflect that in their toys.
Yeah, yeah. It's so fascinating how toys become quickly status objects and ways to differentiate oneself in society. You know, just like appearance and everything else, where selfhood starts to develop, and we use our objects around us to define ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So what's it like now then as an adult to come back to these toys and fantasy objects or characters and play things? What's maybe the role of play in your practices and projects? And maybe I'll ask Sean to say a little bit first and then Trinie.
I think for me, it never left. I've been like a toy collector, toy fan throughout my entire life. And just that fascination with toys has really kind of driven me into art. I think a lot of my fascination with color and also form and expression are definitely attributable to my fascination with toys. And I think that's what kind of prompted me to go get my MFA in toy design, and then move into multimedia. So no, I think for me, just never left.
Okay, great. Trinie?
Yeah, I agree. I feel the same way. I've always loved toys, and I've always loved young people and watching subcultures evolve, and that's why I love being in rooms full of students now. Young people keep me young. So and play is such an integral part to the creative process. So if we forget how to play, I feel like, at least if I forget how to play, I'm really sunk when I sit down and try to do my serious work. Yeah, there's that like physical need for play that I feel. And also there's this level of taking things seriously that aren't usually taken seriously, which I've always been really interested in, probably coming from like 90s DIY culture. And so I thought, you know what, as I work through mid-career artistry, what would really get my colleagues like their hairs up as far as like taking it, like, I'm going to make a book about dolls, and I can just like see all the eyes rolling, like, oh, another book about dolls, or like another. So I really like these areas, and I always seek them out. And I think Mike Kelly did that too with the stuffed animals. He was really good at being provocative and taking risks and just pushing people's ideas about what could be serious, so this kind of sense of humor and pushing the like gendering of dolls too is so interesting. So, the idea that like certain people would consider looking into a project like this and dealing with cliches too is always part of it with toys, I think. Dealing with the kind of things that we're used to working with as material and visual graphic stuff and just remaking it and rethinking about it all the time is super interesting.
That's such an important aspect of play, this kind of open-endedness, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this possibility of creating and recreating, and you're doing that when you're designing too, and when you're doing something like character work and animation, you're also, there's a pose to model after, but there's an endless variety of poses that are possible, right?
Yeah, just in the timing of poses and animation in particular, I believe is mostly play. There's definitely a realism to it that you need to add in, but the way you can exaggerate poses or size or happy jumps, it's a lot of it feels like physical play even though it's not. It's computer.
Right, and it's something that's so important right now as the world has so much heaviness in it, to have these creative outlets. So another connection that I saw between these two projects, The Birth of the Internet and your character design, is maybe some interest in working with images of women or girls, or maybe in Trinie's case, making work for an audience that's a little girl. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about this defiant young woman with her hair flying about, and the choice to use I think mostly girl dolls, right? In the same
All girl dolls.
All girl dolls. Dolls don't have to be, although of course, so typically they are, because they are such gendered things in our society. So Sean, maybe could you talk about that first?
Sure. I think I've always kind of been interested in that young girl defiant feeling, because I felt that so much and so keenly as a little girl, that there's so much possibility out there, but you also have to stand up for yourself and make sure your voice is heard. And so I think that's brought me to keep working on this theme of strong young women. And for my thesis project, we actually did a pop-up book that was centered around a female character that was learning all about electricity and lighting up this castle. It had like embedded circuits and things. And the same kind of thought process was there, that she was learning and figuring things out for herself and moving in this world that she didn't necessarily understand. But giving it the good old, college try and trying to figure it out and conquer. And so I think that's just the central theme.
That's super interesting. It sounds like that actually has a lot of resonance with this project, Birth of the Internet, too, if she's also playing with technology, right?
Yeah.
And exploring with technology. Great. Trinie, could you?
I know. Wait, you're freezing a little bit. I think I caught it. Yeah, I do think it has a lot in common with, yeah. Oh, are you frozen too?
A little bit. What can we do? Okay.
There we go.
See if
Okay, we're back. We're back.
Hooray, technology.
Yeah, no, this is here are some of the cast of characters over here in my office.
Awesome.
No, they're strictly, I chose American Girl dolls on purpose for this series because they came about when they were in there, because I'm part of the project is about understanding what mainstream means right now and the term mainstream. So when these dolls came out, they were like really exclusive, really expensive, suffering with diversity issues, to say the least. And totally popular, like insanely popular. So I became, when I was a kid, I thought they were the dumbest thing that ever existed. Honestly, I was super against it. And so that's always a place where I, you know, when I have strong opinions before, it's always in creativity, like a good place to return to. It's like, what did you have strong opinion before? And then you visit that polarized opinion, you know? So, yeah, so I started collecting them used, and it also has to do with like time, because when you're nursing, you're just kind of like hanging out. And I was like, oh my God, I have to do something creative with this time. So I started like collecting things used on the internet and learning e-commerce for the first time. And then finding out that these subcultures of moms that are probably dealing with the same kind of stuff, you know, like this whole like worlds unfold on the internet about like moms who are so resourceful and they're buying and selling things as their kids are getting older so they can have funds to get new stuff for their kids, and you know, all these amazing things that women do. So it's very, very much like a conscious choice of branding and gendering. Also too, I never understood heteronormativity really. And these dolls were such a kind of like mainstream idea that it just never related to it. And so now that I have a daughter, and I was really, you know, ruminating on how to open the world up to her, not restrict her, not, you know, a lot of these things we as progressive parents think about today, like support whoever they are. And I don't want to push gender on her. And then, you know, you see kids just gravitating towards what they like anyway. So I was thinking about all these things as I was choosing objects to work with. And I'm completely fascinated by it. I'm like completely fascinated by learning what heteronormative culture looks like, since I present as a heteronormative person right now with a cisgendered male partner and a kid, and, you know, all these things I never thought I would like do. And I'm so happy. And I really want to show all those variants in communities and overlaps and, you know, the dualistic like gender ideas, and even like dualistic between queer and heteronorm, you know, it all falls apart so fast and so much more complex. So trying to like work with inclusivity, I think like through exclusive objects that are traditionally exclusive is something really weird to me and fun. I don't know if it's going to work out yet, but it's fun to try.
It's a problem to solve.
It's a problem to solve. It'll keep me working. That's all it's about, you know?
Yes. Okay. So switching gears just a little bit to something maybe more technical, I wanted to ask you all about what excites you or delights you about experimenting with new digital tools and forms, because you both do that in your practices. And as you mentioned earlier, Trinie, there's also this connection between shifting from 2D to 3D that also happens in both of your practices. So if you could talk a little bit about some of the tools that you use, and keep in mind that we're also thinking about how we can help students think about some of the different tools that they're using, or that they might like to use when we return to labs that have more tools. So maybe Trinie, if you want to start first, and then Sean.
Yeah, I mean, Sean, you'll be able to speak so much more articulately about actual tech, because I'm a low tech like armchair graphic designer who thinks of collaboration as my main tool, I would say. So when I'm making books, I have strong ideas and visions for how I want them to look, but I am building like literally with scissors and tape and colored pencils a lot of the time. So
which is okay too. Those are also tools.
Those are tools. That's what I'm dealing with. Like, you know, Xerox, I'm coming from 90s zine making. So so collaboration is for me like the tool to get with if you're thinking in design, because and art, because you can team up with your book design friends, your typographer friends, your sculpture friends, your photographer, and you just start trading ideas, and then you can learn and explore, and you can learn new media if you want to, or if it's too technical and you just need somebody else to do what you're trying to do. You know, you can ask them to do something in return for something that you have skills to do. So yeah, collaboration is my main tool in all of these projects. because I'm not that good with computers, honestly.
Well, you're doing fine right now, so that's good. I love that, actually. I think it's important for folks to remember that technology includes things like scissors and tape, and that especially if that's what you have access to, those are great technologies to use.
Yeah, yarn, paint, haptic materials that feel good in your hands, clay. Yeah,
super satisfying.
Well, so much of 3D technology is trying to make 3D look like the real thing. Like there's characters out there that have hair made out of yarn, and just coming up with the technology to try and figure that out is a huge achievement, just when you could probably just create a little character out of some yarn. But I think in general, 3D is so collaborative. If you go to any of your latest movies, the number of people that work on a 3D movie is just huge, absolutely huge, and it's not going to change anytime soon. And so you have to be able to collaborate. Your model needs to be well done and set up so that you can just pass it down the production pipeline, and there's other people that are thinking about lighting, animation, all of the different materials. It's fundamental to 3D artists, I think, these days, that you have to collaborate. But as far as technology, I think for this piece, I created it because I was teaching ZBrush for the first time, which is 3D sculpture. And in the fall, I normally teach Maya, which is much more like hard surface, building things out of set, cylinders and spheres and all that good stuff. So part of this project of creating a character that has so much wild hair and so many free forms and organic shapes was trying to get a handle on how I can teach that technology to students. I find 3D sculpture very exciting, but really challenging in that very subtle forms, like a female body, is much more subtle than, in some ways, than your like hardened superhero male character that's, the stereotype. And trying to teach that difference and help students create their own art with whatever kind of gendered character they want, or ungendered if they want, is something that I think this 3D sculpture technology gives us that opportunity to explore. And so, I think in the future, I definitely want to keep going with there's so many different types of 3D. There's 3D texturing, 3D lighting and rendering and everything. So I'm going to keep broadening my horizons. And I think for 3D artists in particular, we can't ever get complacent. We always have to push to the new, latest technology and bring all of our principles and experience to that. So.
That makes a lot of sense. I really related to what you were saying about just the pragmatic aspect of learning something so that you can share it with others. As a kind of collaboration, it's easy to say, oh yeah, like learn how to collaborate and embrace collab, but it's like there are so many different kinds of collaboration, and one is learning how to do something and so you can share it, and then you learn things about your own process in the interim, right? So yeah, that's how I got into teaching book arts too, and working with physical, like graphic design and traditional bookbinding and things like that, was the desire to build into literature courses in art settings, studio art and visual art program settings, teaching visual thinkers and graphic thinkers about writing by letting them use their skills and play with typography, play with sculptural objects so they can understand emphasis and narrative arc and building characters and all those literary ideas. So that's so important, I think.
I love
It
that.
is so important, and it's also so hard. I also am really interested in collaboration in what I teach. In fact, my lecture was just called collaboration in one of my classes last week, because I'm interested in the way that artists do this across all sorts of different transdisciplinary practices, perhaps, as I was talking about in my class on climate crisis, but also just the way people work together. As someone who studies the history of performance art, that's also a collaborative practice so much of the time, right? And sometimes the work itself is just a collaboration and there's nothing else to it. It's like the act of getting people to work together at all can be an artwork. And it's incredibly difficult to get people to work together, but also incredibly fruitful and wonderful when a conversation like this one, and these conversations are my art contribution to the faculty show, right? Thinking about the history of conversation and talking together as part of art practice too. So thank you all so much for talking today. I think we'll conclude our conversation there, and bravo, nice work. Yay. Okay,
creating the space for us. It's really fun to see you and hear about these, and I love the dinner table. Bringing the dinner table into the Zoom format is really fun, and hopefully we'll get to have dinner like physically someday. But that's another story. We'll wait until it's safe. Yeah.
Thank you all.